In the busy streets of Atlanta, Derrick's life looked perfect. He had a new home, a new love, and soon, a new baby. To show the world his pride, he prepared a grand baby shower, filled with shining lights, music, and guests. But deep inside his plans was a hidden cruelty. He sent an invitation to Rachel, the woman who once stood beside him and carried his dreams. The envelope sparkled with gold letters and proud words, as if written to mock the one truth Rachel carried in her heart, the truth that she had once been called empty, barren, and broken. When Rachel opened the invitation, her hands trembled. The words pressed into her chest like sharp stones. For a moment she thought of tearing it apart, of throwing it into the fire where all her pain belonged. Yet something inside her shifted. Her silence had lasted too long, and this was no ordinary day. She folded the card slowly, placed it back on the table, and lifted her eyes with a strength she had not felt in years. She would not hide anymore. She would not let shame write her story. The day of the baby shower was set, and Rachel would be there. But she would not come alone, because the secret she carried was bigger than Derrick's new beginning. If you walk away now, you will miss the secret rolling straight toward this room. Tap subscribe now so you don't have to ask others what happened. If you still won't subscribe, say in the comments why you chose to turn away. Charlotte, North Carolina, was where Rachel's story with Derrick had first taken root. The city was full of life, with tall banks reaching toward the sky, streets that pulsed with cars and laughter, and neighborhoods where families gathered on porches in the summer air. For Rachel, those early days in Charlotte were bright. Derrick had once been the man who could make her laugh until her sides ached. He had promised her a future filled with love, with children, with a home where joy would never end. But promises are fragile things. Rachel remembered the first miscarriage as if it had happened yesterday. The house they shared was small but warm, painted in soft creams with flowers that leaned against the porch railing. Derrick had been excited when she told him she was pregnant, his eyes wide with hope, his hands lifting her as if she were a miracle herself. For weeks they whispered about baby names, about tiny shoes and painted walls. Then, in a quiet hospital room, hope slipped away. Rachel lay on a stiff bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling emptiness where life had once been. Doctors spoke in soft tones, but their words cut like glass. It happens. Sometimes the body isn't ready. Try again. Derrick had held her hand, but his grip felt cold. He said it would be all right, that next time would be different. Rachel wanted to believe him. The second miscarriage came months later, heavier than the first. She cried for nights, her body aching, her spirit cracked. Derrick grew restless. His patience thinned like smoke in the wind. He stopped whispering names. He stopped touching her gently. Instead, he spent long nights out with friends, returning with the smell of liquor on his clothes. The third loss was the one that broke her completely. Rachel had been sure this time would be different. She had prayed, lit candles at church, spoken to her own body as though it could hear her pleas. When the bleeding started, she clutched her stomach and begged the child not to go. But fate was merciless. Derrick didn't cry this time. He didn't even sit at her side. He paced the room, anger boiling in his chest. "How many more times, Rachel? How many more?" His voice wasn't filled with grief. It was filled with blame. The walls of their home no longer held warmth. Derrick's whispers turned into curses, his smiles into sneers. In public, he started dropping cruel words, little poison seeds that spread quickly. He told friends, co-workers, even strangers at bars that Rachel could never give him children. He said it like it was a fact, like her womb had betrayed him, like she had failed as a woman. Those whispers became rumors, and soon Rachel could feel the stares. At church, neighbors looked at her with pity, some with judgment. In grocery stores, whispers trailed her like shadows. Her body carried more than grief. It carried shame. One night, the house filled with shouting. Derrick accused her of stealing his future. Rachel begged him to stop, tears running down her face. But Derrick's anger was wild. He slammed a fist against the wall and spat words that seared her soul. "You'll never be a mother, Rachel. Never." That night, Rachel packed a small bag. She didn't wait for him to return from wherever he stormed off to. She left the house, left Charlotte, left the city where her dreams had been buried. She disappeared. Derrick told anyone who asked that she had run away, too ashamed to face the truth. He called her barren, broken, worthless. His words painted her image in fire, and soon, people only remembered Rachel as the woman who could never give life. But what no one knew was that Rachel's story had not ended. Far from the whispers, in a new town where her name meant nothing, Rachel sat in a doctor's office. The walls were painted white, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. She listened as the doctor shook his head gently. His words struck her like knives. "Your body has been through too much. The chances of you ever carrying a child to term are very small, perhaps impossible." Rachel nodded, but inside her heart shattered again. She walked out of the clinic, feeling smaller than ever. She looked at the world around her, families holding children, laughter spilling onto sidewalks, and wondered if she was meant to live forever as an outsider to joy. But life has strange ways of rewriting stories. Months later, her body changed. She was sick in the mornings, her skin glowed differently, and a quiet flutter began within her. Fear gripped her first. She thought it was impossible. She thought it was another trick of hope, another dream that would crumble. Yet the doctor's tests were clear. She was pregnant, not with one child, not with two, with 3 triplets. Rachel couldn't believe it. Her hands shook as she held the ultrasound photo. 3 tiny shapes, 3 tiny heartbeats flickering on the screen. She pressed the image to her chest and sobbed. It was as if heaven itself had heard her prayers and answered with a triple blessing. But joy came tangled with fear. She remembered Derrick's face, his cruel laughter, his poisonous words. How could she tell him? How could she return to the man who had buried her spirit in shame? So she didn't. She vanished deeper into silence, carrying her secret like a jewel hidden from thieves. She worked long hours in Houston, saving every dollar, preparing for the day her children would arrive. Her belly grew heavy, her steps slower, but her resolve never wavered. When the triplets finally came into the world, their cries filled the room like a song. Rachel wept, holding them close, knowing her life had been rewritten in blood and miracle. She named them quietly, giving them the strength she wished she had always carried. They looked like Derrick, their tiny faces carrying shadows of his smile, his jawline, even his eyes. Yet Rachel told no one. She chose silence, for silence was safer than cruelty. Years passed. She raised them with everything she had. She clipped coupons, worked shifts, prayed over their beds at night. Each child was a reminder that her body had not failed. It had triumphed. But there was still a question, whispered only in her heart. Was Derrick truly the father? Her memories blurred, the nights of grief, the nights she tried to bury pain with strangers' words of comfort, with fleeting moments she wished to forget. The triplets looked like Derrick. Yes. But there was a shadow in her heart that whispered, what if? And so she kept that secret locked away, a silence deeper than any wound. Now, as she prepared to walk into his baby shower, pushing a stroller filled with the very life he said she'd never have, the secret weighed heavy. Because the world would soon know she was not barren, she was not broken, she was a mother. But the question of who truly fathered the babies remained locked in silence. This pain is real, and the truth is close. Skip now and you'll carry guesses instead of answers. Hit subscribe so you're here when the past strikes. If you refuse, tell us in the comments what made you step back. Houston, Texas became Rachel's hiding place, a city big enough to swallow her pain and keep her secrets. Skyscrapers touched the hot southern sky, freeways roared with endless traffic, and the nights glowed with neon signs that never asked questions. To strangers, she was just another single mother working long shifts. But behind the closed door of her small apartment, a greater truth lived. 3 tiny cribs stood in one room. 3 small faces turned toward her when she entered. The triplets, her miracle and her burden, filled the silence with cries, laughter, and soft breaths. Their features grew sharper each month, and with every passing year, their resemblance to Derrick became harder to deny. The same dark hair, the same bold eyes, even the crooked smile that once made Rachel fall in love. Yet she told no one. Rachel worked 2 jobs, one at a diner where the smell of grease clung to her clothes, and another cleaning offices late into the night. Her feet blistered, her hands cracked, but she never complained. Every dollar was folded into envelopes, marked for rent, food, or the children's needs. And hidden beneath the floorboard of her bedroom, another envelope swelled with documents. Hospital tags engraved with Derrick's name, ultrasound photos, and DNA tests sealed and ready. She guarded them like treasures, proof that her children were real, proof that her body had not failed her. Still, a shadow lingered. She remembered the nights of grief before the triplets came, nights when she tried to drown pain with the comfort of strangers, when blurred faces and whispered promises blurred into each other. The children looked like Derrick, yes, but what if? What if another man's blood whispered inside them? She locked that fear away, too heavy to face, too dangerous to speak. Years passed. The triplets grew, their laughter filling the apartment, their voices rising above the sound of Rachel's exhaustion. They became her reason to wake, her reason to fight, her reason to stand tall when the world had labeled her barren. But secrets never rest forever. It began with small things. Envelopes slipped under her door, filled with cash, bags of groceries appearing on the steps, toys for the children wrapped in paper, left outside like offerings. Rachel didn't know who left them, but the gifts kept coming. Every time she tried to catch the giver, he vanished into the shadows. One night, returning from her shift, she saw him. A tall figure leaned against a streetlight near her apartment, watching. When she drew closer, he stepped back into the dark, leaving only a folded note on her door. Her heart pounded as she opened it. No words, only money tucked inside. The visits continued, always silent. Always leaving more than he took. Rachel began to wonder. Was it Derrick? Was guilt driving him to help from afar while he lived another life in Atlanta? Or was it someone else, a stranger who knew too much? The mystery clung to her like a second skin. But the truth was more complicated. One evening, while the children slept, Rachel stepped onto her balcony. The night air carried a soft wind, and below, the figure appeared again. He stood in the shadows, but this time he didn't move away. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and Rachel froze. Something about the man seemed familiar, like a ghost she had forgotten. Then he vanished. The mystery grew deeper. Each visit left her with more questions. Why would someone watch over her in silence? Why give without asking for thanks? And most of all, what did he know about the children? She tried to bury her fear, but she couldn't ignore the truth. The man was following not just her, but them. He appeared at the children's school gates, standing far back. He lingered at the park, blending with the crowd. He never came too close, but he was always there. Rachel's heart carried both fear and strange comfort. Whoever he was, he never harmed them. He only gave. Still, she began saving every gift, every note, every piece of evidence. She tucked them beside the DNA records, building a box of secrets too heavy for any one person to bear. Then came the day when her silence could no longer protect her. The children were nearly 5 when the mystery man did something he had never done before. He left not money, not food, but a photograph. It was old, faded, and creased, showing Derrick as a young man, laughing with friends. In the corner of the picture stood the very man who had been visiting her, half smiling, half hidden. Rachel's blood ran cold. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a ghost. This was someone from Derrick's past. Someone who knew both of them, someone who had chosen to watch her life in secret. The weight of it pressed on her chest. She realized the truth she had tried to bury was crawling into daylight. If this man had followed her all these years, if he had given gifts, if he had appeared in shadows, what else did he know? Did he know the children's true father? Did he carry the answer she was too afraid to face? Rachel couldn't run anymore. She couldn't hide. The secret she had carried in silence for years was no longer hers alone. And when she finally packed the stroller and set her face toward Atlanta, she felt the shadow move behind her, steady, silent, following her every step. Because when Rachel walked into Derrick's new life, into the baby shower he built to mock her, she would not be walking in alone. The mystery man was coming too, and with him, the truth was about to unravel. The shadow that has been helping is moving into the light. Don't be the last one to learn his name. Tap subscribe so you don't miss the reveal. If you won't, write in the comments why you'd rather not know. The baby shower was not small. Derrick made sure of that. He wanted the whole city to see his new life. He wanted them to see him as a man who had risen above the past. So he rented one of the most expensive halls in Buckhead, Atlanta. He called friends, family, neighbors, and even old classmates. He told them to dress their best because this was not just a baby shower. This was a show of power. Outside the hall, cars lined the street. Expensive cars, polished until they shone. Drivers stood waiting, holding doors open for women in long dresses and men in sharp suits. Inside, the smell of roses mixed with food and sweet cakes. Lights hung from the ceiling, glittering on the polished floor. In the center of the room stood a cake so tall it nearly touched the chandelier. People pointed at it and laughed. Everything about the day screamed pride. Music played softly in the background. On the tables, glasses of wine sparkled and plates of food were stacked high. There were cameras, too. A hired man moved from corner to corner, snapping photos, recording Derrick's glory. Every laugh, every smile, every cheer was caught on film. Derrick wanted proof of his success. He walked through the room like a king. His suit was black and sharp, his shoes so bright they reflected the lights. He shook hands, slapped shoulders, and told stories of his bright future. His laugh was loud, his smile wide. People gathered around him, clapping, nodding, agreeing with every word. His new partner stood beside him. She wore a pale cream gown that shone under the lights. She held her belly with pride, her fingers spread across the soft curve. People kept saying how much she glowed. They called her blessed, chosen, lucky. She smiled and leaned into Derrick's arm as if to say they were the perfect pair. Derrick looked around the hall, his chest full of pride. This was what he wanted. This was what he had always believed he deserved. A woman who could give him a child, a family that made him look strong, guests that bowed to him with respect. He lifted his glass and began to speak. His voice carried across the room, proud and clear. He talked about his new life. He told them he was stepping into fatherhood, into manhood. People clapped. Some shouted his name. He smiled even wider. He felt untouchable. But then the doors opened. Rachel walked in. At first, no one moved. The music still played, but the sound seemed to fall flat. Conversations cut short. Laughter faded. Heads turned one by one until almost every eye in the hall was fixed on her. She wore a simple dress, dark and plain. Her shoes were worn. Her hair was tied back. She did not shine like the others. She did not glow. She looked like a shadow against the brightness of the room. But her head was high, her back straight, her eyes calm. Whispers started. Is that her? She shouldn't be here. What is she thinking? Some guests frowned. Others smirked. Some leaned close to whisper into their neighbor's ear. The air filled with judgment. Derrick saw her too. His face lit up with a smile, but it was not kind. It was sharp, cruel. He raised his glass again, calling the room to look. His voice carried with mocking pride. He pointed her out. He made her the example of failure. He wanted everyone to laugh at her, to see her as the woman who could not give him what he now had. And some of them did laugh. Rachel stood in the doorway for a moment. She did not fight. She did not cry. She did not lower her head. Her eyes stayed steady. Her lips stayed closed. Then she took a step forward. The whispers grew louder. Why would she come? She must be jealous. Doesn't she feel shame? But Rachel's steps did not falter. She walked into the hall, her plain shoes tapping against the polished floor. The crowd watched her every move. Some shook their heads, some crossed their arms, some smiled with pity. Derrick's partner placed her hand on her belly again and leaned against him, as if to remind Rachel of her loss. Her smile was wide and proud, meant to cut. Derrick laughed again, his voice echoing across the room. The tension was heavy now. Everyone waited for Rachel to bow her head, to turn around, to leave. Everyone waited for her to break, but she did not. Then came the sound. Soft, almost too soft at first. Wheels on the smooth floor. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Some people heard it and turned their heads. Others stayed focused on Rachel. Derrick kept smiling, waiting for her to run. But the sound grew louder. From the back of the hall, the double doors opened again, and something rolled in. A stroller. At first, people thought it was nothing. Maybe a guest with a child. Maybe someone lost. But then another stroller followed. And then another. 3. 3 strollers moved slowly into the hall, one behind the other. Their wheels glinted under the lights. The sound of them rolling echoed in the silence. The guests froze. Gasps cut through the air. Some people covered their mouths. Some grabbed the arm of the person beside them. Others leaned forward, their eyes wide, trying to see. The strollers came closer. Their covers were open. Inside, 3 small faces looked out under the bright lights. 3 sets of eyes. 3 small mouths. 3 children breathing softly, unaware of the storm they had just brought into the room. And each child carried something no one could deny. The dark hair, the shape of the eyes, the curve of the mouth, the crooked smile, they looked like Derrick. The crowd broke into whispers. Those babies! They look like him. They're his. The music stopped. The laughter was gone. The air was heavy with shock. Rachel stood behind the strollers. She did not speak. She did not move. Her face was calm, her eyes fixed on Derrick. The guests turned their heads from the children to Derrick, then back to Rachel. Confusion, shock, disbelief filled their faces. Derrick's hand shook. The glass slipped from his fingers. It fell to the floor, cracking and spilling drink across the tiles. His smile vanished. His face turned pale. His body seemed frozen in place. His new partner's hand dropped from her belly. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes darted between the children and Derrick, fear rising in her chest. The hall was silent now. Silent, except for the sound of 3 soft breaths, 3 small lives that filled the room more loudly than any voice. Rachel's children were her answer. Her children were her pride, and that was when the entire hall gasped. 3 strollers are in the room. Blink and you'll pretend you never wanted to see. Press subscribe now so you witness the moment with the rest of us. If not, explain in the comments why you looked away. The room was frozen. 3 strollers stood in the middle of the grand hall. The chandeliers above still glowed, the music had died, and the laughter had turned into silence. All eyes were fixed on the children. Tiny breaths rose and fell. Tiny fists moved softly. Eyes blinked under the bright light. No one had expected this. 3 children. Not 1, not 2, 3. And the truth was written all over their faces. The same hair, the same eyes, the same crooked smile. Every guest could see it. Every guest knew it. The babies looked like Derrick. Gasps broke through the silence. Whispers rose like waves crashing against the walls. They're his. They look exactly like him. Oh my God. Triplets. Derrick stood frozen, his hand trembling. The broken glass lay at his feet, liquid spreading across the polished floor. His eyes darted between the strollers and Rachel, then back to the children. His mouth opened, but no words came. Rachel stayed behind the strollers, calm, tall, steady. Her eyes never left Derrick. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The children spoke for her. Derrick tried to smile. His lips curled weakly. His voice broke when he tried to laugh. The sound came out strange, forced. This is some kind of joke, he muttered under his breath, though his voice was shaking. The guests did not laugh. They only stared. More whispers spread. Some leaned closer to each other. Some pointed at the children. Others covered their mouths in shock. The room was a storm of voices, all circling the same truth. They look too much like him. Those are his children. He said she was barren. He lied. Derrick's face grew pale. Sweat broke across his forehead. His chest rose and fell quickly, as if the air had grown heavy around him. He raised his hand to silence the crowd, but they did not stop. The whispers only grew louder. His new partner's face turned stiff. Her hand was no longer on her belly. She stared at the children, then at Derrick, then at Rachel. The pride she carried had drained from her eyes. Fear had taken its place. Rachel stood in silence. Her eyes shone with calm fire. Her lips were pressed together, her hands steady on the stroller handles. She had waited for this day. She had prepared for this moment. The crowd pressed closer. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. The babies blinked against the flash, their small hands curling tighter. Then a voice cut through the noise. "Open it, Derrick." The room went quiet again. Everyone turned. An older guest, a man in a gray suit with sharp eyes, stood holding a thin white envelope. His hand shook slightly, but his voice was firm. In his hand was the DNA test Rachel had mailed months earlier. The envelope was still sealed. Derrick's eyes widened. He recognized it instantly. He had received it in the mail. He had refused to open it. He had thrown it into a drawer, hoping it would disappear. But now here it was, in front of everyone. The guest stepped forward, holding the envelope higher. "She sent this to you. You ignored it. Now open it here, in front of all of us." The hall gasped again. Derrick stammered, his lips trembling. No, this is ridiculous. This is some kind of trick. Anyone could fake that envelope." But no one listened. The crowd was hungry now, hungry for truth. "Open it. Show us. Let's see it." Phones pointed toward him, ready to capture every move. Every eye was locked on him. Rachel stood still, her face unreadable. She didn't move toward him. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. The envelope was enough. Derrick's hands shook. He took a step back, then another, but the crowd pressed forward. His new partner whispered his name, but he didn't hear her. His eyes were locked on the envelope, the weight of it pulling him down like chains. The older man placed it on the table in front of him. The white paper gleamed under the light, sharp and final. Silence filled the hall. Derrick reached out, his fingers brushing the edge. He pulled back, as if burned. His chest rose and fell faster. His face turned red, then pale again. The whispers began again. He's scared. He knows what's inside. He lied to all of us. Derrick's hands curled into fists. He slammed the table, his voice breaking. This is a setup. This is not real. She planned this whole thing to humiliate me. The babies stirred at the sound of his shout. One began to cry, soft at first, then louder. The second joined, then the third. Their cries filled the hall, sharp, high-pitched, cutting through the silence like knives. The sound was unbearable. Everyone turned back to the children. Their tiny voices were louder than Derrick's pride, louder than the whispers, louder than the lies. Rachel bent down, her hands soft, her face calm. She touched each child gently, whispering comfort only they could hear. Slowly, their cries faded, replaced with quiet breaths. The hall was silent again. Derrick's shoulders slumped. His chest rose and fell like a man drowning. His eyes flicked from the children to the envelope, from the envelope to Rachel. The crowd pressed closer. Open it. Do it now. Prove yourself. The older man leaned forward, his voice steady. If you believe these children are not yours, prove it. Open the envelope. The hall was so quiet now that every breath could be heard. The chandeliers seemed frozen, their light locked on Derrick's trembling hands. The babies shifted in their strollers, their small faces calm, waiting like the rest of the crowd. Derrick reached out again. His hand shook, his fingers gripped the edge. The paper crinkled softly under his touch, his lips parted, his chest heavy. And then, as the whole hall watched, he began to tear it open. The sound of paper ripping echoed louder than thunder. Every eye widened. Every phone pointed closer. Every heart pounded. Rachel's eyes never moved from him, her face calm, her body steady. This was the moment she had carried in silence for years. Derrick pulled out the folded paper. His eyes dropped to the words. His lips trembled. His body froze. And when the seal was broken, the room went silent. The envelope is in his hand, and the truth is about to speak. If you leave now, you will live on rumors. Hit subscribe so you can say you saw it happen. If you won't, own it in the comments. Tell us why you ran. The hall held its breath as Derrick unfolded the paper. His fingers shook so hard the sheet trembled. His chest rose and fell like he had run a mile. Beads of sweat rolled down his forehead, dripping onto the words he was too afraid to read. The crowd leaned forward, phones raised higher. Some guests whispered in sharp breaths. Others pressed their hands to their mouths. What does it say? Read it. Derrick's lips parted. His eyes darted across the page once, then again, then again. His face drained white. His knees buckled as though the floor had shifted under him. Gasps tore through the hall. Rachel stood steady behind the three strollers, her face calm, her hands still. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She had lived this moment in her heart for years, and now it was here. Finally, Derrick spoke, his voice cracked, broken and hoarse. This is fake. It's not real. She forged it. The room exploded with whispers. Forged it? How could she? No. Look at his face. He knows. Phones zoomed in closer. Flashes popped. Every move he made was being recorded, trapped forever. Derrick slammed the table with his fist. His voice rose higher, desperate. She planned this. She set me up. But Rachel moved. Slowly, calmly, she reached into her bag. She pulled out 3 small plastic bands, white and faded with time. She laid them on the table one by one. Gasps filled the room again. They were hospital baby tags. Each one carried the same engraving, the same last name, Derrick's name. Whispers swept across the crowd like wildfire. Oh my God, she kept them! They all have his name on them. This is real. This is proof. Phones clicked closer, recording the tags from every angle. Some guests stepped forward, pointing, murmuring. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Derrick's new partner staggered back. Her hand dropped from her belly. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked at him, then at the babies, then at Rachel. Her face twisted with confusion and fear. Derrick's voice cracked again, louder, desperate. "No, she made these. They're fake." But the cries of the babies began to rise. One wailed first, high-pitched and sharp. The second followed, louder, stronger. Then the third joined, filling the hall with three voices rising together, cutting sharper than knives, louder than Derrick's screams. The sound shook the guests. Some covered their ears. Others cried out, startled. The room seemed to tremble with the power of their voices. Rachel bent low, touching each child gently, whispering softly. Her calm hand stilled them, her steady voice wrapped around them. Slowly, one by one, their cries softened, until the hall was silent again. Silent, except for the whispers. "He's lying." "He knows they're his." "She has all the proof." And then another voice rose. "I believe her." The crowd turned. It was a woman's voice, quivering but steady. Derrick's mother stepped forward. Her silver hair framed her tear-streaked face. Her hands shook as she clasped them together. She looked at her son, then at the babies, then at Rachel. "I know the truth," she said. Her voice cracked, but it carried through the hall. "I saw the children years ago. I visited her in secret. I knew they were yours." The hall erupted. Gasps, shouts, screams. "What? His mother knew? She saw them?" Phones swung toward her. Every camera zoomed in. Derrick staggered back as if struck, his face twisted with rage. "You... what? You're lying!" His voice cracked, high and broken. His body shook. His mother's tears spilled down her cheeks. "I saw them. I held them. I knew they were your blood. I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Afraid of what you would do to her. Afraid of how you would treat them. You were cruel, Derrick. You called her barren. You told the world she was nothing. But I knew. I always knew." The guests erupted again. "She knew all along. She hid it from him. She protected Rachel." Some clapped. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others recorded with wide eyes. Derrick shouted, his voice hoarse, his hands clawing at the air. "No! She's lying! She's helping her! They've planned this together!" But his mother wasn't finished. Her voice grew stronger. "I didn't just see them once. I helped her. I gave her money. I bought food. I watched them grow from afar. I couldn't abandon them. They are my grandchildren, my blood." The hall shook with screams and gasps. Phones flashed, people shouted, guests surged forward. Derrick's face twisted in horror. His chest heaved. His lips trembled. And then his mother spoke again, her words breaking like thunder. "Your father knew too. He told me to keep it quiet. He said the truth would destroy you. We chose silence." The crowd erupted into chaos. "What? His father too? They all knew. This family is twisted." Phones shook in hands. People shouted, screamed, cursed. The truth had spread wider than Derrick could ever stop. His empire of pride had collapsed into ruins. But the storm was not finished, because his mother's confession wasn't the only betrayal exposed that night. The name tags and the confession are where lies come to die. Miss this, and you miss the turn that changes everything. Tap subscribe to stay with the truth. If you refuse, tell the comments why proof wasn't enough. The hall was already shaking with betrayal. The DNA results lay open on the table, and the hospital tags glowed under the lights. Derrick's mother's confession had poured like acid across his reputation, burning everything he had tried to build. Guests still gasped, still whispered, still recorded. His name, once carried on their lips with pride, now dripped like poison. But the storm had not yet reached its true power. A sudden sound broke the roar of the crowd, sharper than the rest. It was not a baby's cry this time, nor the gasp of another guest. It was the sound of a woman breaking apart. Derrick's new partner had stepped back from him, her hand still hovering near her stomach, as though she could not bear to touch it anymore. Tears rushed down her cheeks, black streaks of mascara cutting lines down her face. Her breaths came sharp and heavy, her shoulders rising and falling like she was drowning in her own lie. She looked around the room at the eyes staring into her, at the phones recording her, at the whispers that cut deeper than any blade, and then, with a sob that tore through the heavy silence, she screamed, "I am not pregnant!" The chandeliers above seemed to rattle with the force of her words. Gasps ripped through the room in waves. Some people screamed, some covered their mouths, some staggered back as if struck. The guests closest to her leaned away, clutching at each other, their eyes wide. Phones zoomed closer, flashes burst like lightning. Her gown shook as her hands clawed at it. She ripped at the fabric over her stomach, her sobs echoing louder than the music that had died long ago. The silk tore apart, falling open to reveal not life beneath, but lies. Strapped to her belly was a swollen pad, thick and rounded, made to trick the eye. A fake belly. The crowd erupted again. She lied. It's all fake. My God, she faked everything. Her trembling hands tore at the straps, ripping the pad free. She hurled it to the ground. It hit with a heavy thud, rolling once before lying still on the polished floor. The sight of it made some guests cry out in disgust. Others pressed closer with their phones, capturing the moment the lie rolled across the hall like a fallen crown. She pointed at Derrick, her eyes blazing, her voice breaking apart between sobs and fury. You wanted to show the world you finally had a family. You wanted to mock her, to use me as your proof. But everything I gave you was a performance, and you never even looked close enough to see the truth. Gasps deepened. Some guests covered their faces. Others turned to Derrick, their mouths open, their whispers sharp. Rachel did not move. She stood behind her strollers, her eyes steady, her face calm. But inside her chest, her heart pounded with the shock of watching lies collapse in front of her. The woman grabbed her bag from the table, her hands shaking. She dug into it wildly, pulling out a folded piece of paper. She lifted it high, her fingers trembling. A sonogram. The crowd leaned forward, squinting, their eyes wide. Phones zoomed in, catching every angle. "This is fake too," she screamed, her voice raw. "I bought it online, a sonogram picture of a baby that doesn't exist. And Derrick never asked to come with me. He believed every word, every story, because he didn't care about the truth. He only cared about the image." The hall split into shouts. She faked the baby too. Everything was fake? He didn't even check. But Rachel's breath caught. Her eyes locked on the sonogram. The black and white grain of the picture, the faint outline of shapes she knew by heart, the marks on the corner of the page. Her stomach dropped. She knew this sonogram. She had seen it before. Years ago in Houston, when she had carried her triplets inside her body, the hospital printer had given her the same image. She had kept her copy hidden, folded in a drawer, too precious to show anyone. And now here it was again, held high in another woman's hand, recycled, stolen, turned into another lie. Her calm cracked for the first time. Not in her face, not in her hands, but in her heart. Because this was not just a lie. This was theft. A piece of her own history twisted and thrown in her face. The crowd erupted louder. "That's Rachel's sonogram. It's the same one! This shower, it's all fake!" Phones clicked faster. Guests screamed at Derrick, screamed at the woman, screamed at the whole story unfolding in front of them. Derrick's chest rose and fell like a man trapped in fire. His lips trembled, his voice weak. You set me up." The woman laughed bitterly through her tears. Her voice cracked but carried. "No, Derrick, you set yourself up. You wanted a stage, you wanted to humiliate her, you wanted to shine. But everything you built was a shell. I lied because I could, and you swallowed every lie because it fed your pride. Gasps shook the room again. Derrick's legs trembled. His hands clawed at the table. His face twisted, red with shame, white with fear. His empire had crumbled faster than he could stop it. The woman hurled the sonogram onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, stopping beside the DNA papers and the hospital tags. 3 proofs, 3 blows, 3 cracks that split his pride wide open. The hall gasped louder than ever before. Some screamed, some laughed bitterly, some shook their heads. The noise grew so heavy it felt like thunder shaking the walls, and then silence, because the truth had sunk in. The entire baby shower, the decorations, the speeches, the glowing pride, had not been built on life. It had been built on lies. The crowd stared at Derrick, their eyes burning with judgment, their phones capturing every second. He had mocked Rachel for years. He had built his glory on her pain. And now, before them all, the mask had been ripped away. And Rachel stood calm, her 3 children breathing softly before her, their lives shining brighter than the chandeliers. The woman's tears still streamed, but her voice was iron when she spoke the final words. This shower was never real, not one piece of it. It was all built on lies, which meant the entire shower had been built on a lie. The belly was fake. The sonogram was stolen. If you exit here, you're choosing the lie over the lesson. Press subscribe and stand with the truth. If not, say in the comments why truth felt too heavy. The banquet hall was already drowning in betrayal and chaos. The fake belly lay where it had been thrown, limp and hollow against the polished floor. No longer the symbol of life, but the symbol of lies. The stolen sonogram rested on the table beside the DNA results and the hospital tags. 3 blows to Derrick's pride that had already stripped him raw before the eyes of his guests. His mother's confession still echoed in the silence, heavy, crushing, shaking the foundation of everything he had tried to build. His partner's tears were still wet on the floor, her screams still clinging to the air. Guests shouted, some into their phones, some at each other, while the cameras of strangers captured the slow ruin of a man who thought he was untouchable. Derrick stood pale, trembling, broken, his empire already cracking. And yet, the night had not finished with him, because even in the middle of all this chaos, there was someone who had not yet spoken. At first, it was only a sound, faint and steady, rising above the roar of the hall. The sound of shoes tapping calmly against the polished floor, each step deliberate, each step echoing louder than the screams. The guests turned, their eyes pulled toward the back of the hall where the shadows stretched longer than the chandelier's reach. And then he appeared. A man walked forward, not rushing, not stumbling, not afraid. He moved like someone who had been waiting for this moment for years. His jacket was plain, dark, and neat, not the kind of clothes meant for a celebration, but the kind of clothes worn by men who carried unfinished wars. His face was partly hidden in shadow, but his eyes were sharp, burning, fixed straight ahead. He did not look at the guests, nor at the decorations, nor even at the fake belly still lying on the ground. His gaze was locked on Derrick, and he walked as if nothing else existed in the room. The crowd parted without being asked. They moved aside, their eyes wide, their whispers rising. Some recognized him, some did not, but all of them felt the weight of his presence. It was the kind of silence that arrives not because people want it, but because it forces itself into their throats and holds them still. Rachel's chest tightened. She knew him. She had not known his name then, but she had known his presence. She had seen him in Houston in the darkest nights, a figure watching from across the street, a man who left envelopes of money on her doorstep, who tucked gifts near her children's beds, a man who kept his distance but never failed her. For years she had wondered if he was real, or if her exhausted mind had invented him out of desperation. But now, he was here, walking into the fire, into the storm, into the ruins of Derrick's empire. The crowd's whispers grew louder. "Who is that? Where did he come from? Was he here all along?" And then, a sharp voice cut through the whispers, loud and clear. "That's Marcus!" Gasps broke out, heads turned, eyes widened. Marcus. The name passed through the hall like thunder. Some of the older guests remembered. Some of the neighbors whispered to each other with recognition. They knew the story. They remembered the friendship that had once been unbreakable, the brotherhood between Derrick and Marcus when they were boys. They remembered the laughter, the shared dreams, the promises of loyalty, but they also remembered the betrayal, the money that had come between them, the cruel way Derrick had cast Marcus aside. Derrick had once boasted that Marcus was nothing, that he had cut him off because Marcus was weak, because Marcus could not rise. Derrick had told the world that Marcus had begged him for help, and he had laughed in his face. He had left Marcus in the dirt and climbed higher without him. And now Marcus stood in the center of the hall, tall, steady, unshaken, walking straight into the ruins Derrick had made for himself. Derrick's face twisted, his lips curled back, his body shook as he spat the name out like poison. "You! What are you doing here?" Marcus stopped a few feet away from him. His face was calm, but his eyes were steel. When he spoke, his voice carried through the hall without effort, sharp and clear, cutting through every whisper. "I protected Rachel because you abandoned her." Gasps tore through the guests again. Rachel's heart pounded. The words struck her like a hammer, not because she didn't know, but because hearing them aloud confirmed what her heart had whispered to her for years. Marcus's gaze shifted for the first time. He turned to the three strollers, his eyes softening. He looked at the children, then at Rachel. His voice broke its edge just enough to carry warmth. "I knew the kids were yours before you did." The crowd erupted. Phones shot higher. People screamed. Some cursed Derrick's name. Others shouted in disbelief. Others whispered furiously to their neighbors. The room shook with noise, with shock, with the heat of truth tearing open another wound. Derrick staggered forward, his voice shrill, broken, desperate. "You're lying! You've always hated me! You're jealous! You came here to destroy me!" But Marcus did not shout back. He did not break. His calm was the blade that sliced deeper than anger could. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket. The crowd leaned closer. Derrick froze, his eyes narrowing, his chest heaving. Marcus pulled out a phone. He swiped it once and the screen glowed. Then he held it high for all to see. On the screen was a photo. Not the polished Derrick of that night. Not the man in a sharp suit surrounded by gifts and guests. This was Derrick in another time. He was slumped in a chair, drunk, his shirt hanging loose, his eyes half closed. His hand gripped a glass, his mouth wide open mid-laugh. His pride was not shining in that picture. It was rotting. Gasps shook the hall, and then Marcus swiped again. Another photo. Derrick at a table, his arm thrown over the back of a chair, his lips twisted in a sneer. On the table beside him, scribbled in his own handwriting, were words that made the room freeze. Mocking her was the best part. The crowd screamed. Some covered their mouths, others pointed, some cursed. Phones zoomed closer, flashes burst like lightning. The image burned into every camera. Derrick lunged forward, his hands clawing at the air. "Stop! Don't show them that! Give me that phone!" Marcus stepped back, his voice calm but heavy as iron. "The world deserves to see who you really are." And he swiped again. This time the phone was mirrored to the projector. The photos appeared on the giant screen at the front of the hall. Derrick's drunken face, his cruel smile, his mocking words filled the room, too large to ignore. The guests exploded. Screams, curses, gasps, the sound of disbelief and disgust. Some shouted at Derrick, some shouted at Marcus to show more. Others pointed their phones at the screen, capturing proof that would be carried beyond the hall, into the world outside. Rachel stood still, her children breathing softly in their strollers. Her heart steady even as the storm tore louder around her. She had carried the weight of silence for years, but now the silence was over. Marcus's evidence screamed louder than she ever could. Derrick's legs trembled. His face drained pale, then flushed red. His chest rose and fell as if he were drowning. He reached out again, desperate, but his hands only grasped at air. His lies, his pride, his empire, all crumbling into dust before the crowd. Marcus lowered his phone, his eyes locked on Derrick. His words carried like fire. You destroyed yourself. Pride blinded you. Lies carried you. And now truth has come. And it has left you with nothing. And with evidence flashing on the screen, Derrick's empire crumbled. Receipts are on the screen and the mask is off. Don't be the one asking, what happened? Tomorrow. Hit subscribe now so you keep up with the evidence. If you won't, tell the comments why you don't want receipts. The hall did not breathe at first. It only watched. A living circle of eyes, a ring of screens, a crush of beating hearts holding their place as if the floor might tilt with one careless step. The photos on the projection had already burned their stain into the moment, and the last frame still hovered there like a verdict no one could misread. Derrick stood between the table and the screen as though trapped in glass, and the glass had begun to crack. Every gasp from the crowd placed another line across his pride. Every whisper another break. Every steady look from strangers, the weight that finally pushed him to his knees. He tried to speak and found no voice in the first attempt, only a dry scrape of air. He tried again, and the sound that came was small, a shape that could barely stand upright, a word that carried less power than a child's cry. He turned toward the strollers first, not because he chose humility, but because his body had run out of places to hide, and the only path left ran straight through the truth. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest as if searching for the man he had bragged about being, and when he could not find that man, he reached for the edge of the nearest stroller as if the thin metal could hold him together. One of the babies blinked, then yawned the soft, slow yawn of a world that still knows no malice, and that tiny motion folded Derrick in half. He lowered until his forehead nearly met the polished floor, and for a few long breaths the hall saw nothing of him but a shaking back and the hand he planted like a flag of surrender against the tile. He tried to make words again, and they came this time, not strong, but whole enough to carry meaning, the smallest plea scraping across the glitter of the evening. Forgiveness, not in speeches, not in clever lines, only in the raw spill of a man who finally cut the rope he had kept tied around his own denial. He did not dare look for Rachel immediately. He traced the line from the strollers to the hand that steadied them, then up the still arm, then to the face that had learned to hold storms without flinching. When his eyes at last rose to meet hers, the room learned a new silence, the kind built not from shock but from attention, the kind that forms when many souls commit at once to hear what comes next. There were people in that hall who had cheered him hours before, and now they held their applause with the same hands, as if those hands had remembered something better to honor. There were people who had whispered Rachel's name like a rumor, and now they carried it like a hymn. Some eyes were wet because the truth hurt. Some were wet because the truth healed. Some because both wounds can live inside the same moment without tearing it apart. In the back, a child the hall had not noticed tugged at a mother's sleeve and asked in a whisper why the man was crying. The mother bent without looking away and answered with the soft honesty that feeds the next day, well, sometimes people remember too late, and sometimes late is still not enough. Derrick lifted his head. He reached again, this time toward Rachel, not to touch her, but to mark the space between them with the shape of a question only she could answer. He poured apology like water into the heat he had made, and it steamed where it landed, but did not cool the room. It rose and vanished and left the same air behind. He promised change with the breath he had. He promised to step back from the edge he had pushed her toward. He promised to be decent, then good, then worthy. Climbing a ladder with words he had not earned. He begged without the armor of pride. He asked for a door to remain somewhere, anywhere, even if only a small one she would never need to open. He said he would wait near it with his hands at his sides and his head bowed and his voice quiet for as long as it took for forgiveness to learn his name. The crowd felt the pull to decide, a tide that moves in rooms like this when truth and pleading share the same floor. And then the tide turned. It moved not toward Derrick, but toward the woman who had learned to be a harbor while the storm laughed at her. People shifted their bodies the way a field leans toward the sun. The center of the room slid to Rachel, and the clapping began first as a careful test, and then as a certainty. A long, honest sound with no sarcasm in it, no noise meant to wound, only a weight given back to the one who had carried too much alone. It rolled from table to table, it climbed the walls, it filled the chandeliers and shook a few petals loose from roses that had no business learning about justice yet did anyway. Phones lowered, palms came together. Some guests spoke her name without needing volume. Some spoke to themselves. Never again. Remember this. Learn from this. Be better than this. And the room found its answer before Rachel spoke a single word. She waited until the clapping faded to quiet, and the quiet found its shape. She waited until every moving part of the night stood still enough to hear the truth, without a translation. She did not meet the cameras. She did not search for the people who had doubted her. She did not look to Marcus for courage, or to Derrick's mother for permission. She stood with both hands on the strollers and let the steadiness in that grip be the first sentence. The hall leaned closer without stepping. In that lean lived respect, and in that respect lived room for a woman to choose what dignity requires. She did not offer rage, because rage would have given him the script he understood. She did not offer sweetness, because sweetness would have lied about the cost. She chose clarity, the kind that leaves no splinters behind. A life is not a stage, she let the room understand. A womb is not a scoreboard. Love is not a ladder you climb on someone else's back. Pain is not proof you were right to cause it. Children are not trophies. They are breath and future, and the clean version of what we wish we had been, and they should never have to carry the weight of an adult's performance. She did not say those sentences out loud. She let the shape of her stand say them for her, a mother with 3 hearts in her care who had learned that silence can be stronger than speeches when the facts are in order. Derrick tried again to place himself inside her mercy. He offered apologies in different clothes. He tried to shrink his offenses until they could fit inside the word mistake. He stacked woulds and wills, and I swear on top of each other like blocks and hoped they would build a bridge. But every block he placed was made of the same material, the idea that her choice must someday include him, and the bridge bent under its own arrogance and fell without noise. The room watched him learn that humility is not a posture, it is a surrender of entitlement, and he had not yet set that piece down. She drew one breath, and the crowd felt the room click into its final shape. Resilience does not perform. It remains. She would remain. She had no interest in returning to the chessboard where he had once moved her like a piece. She would not be a pawn. Not the sacrifice you pretend to honor after the loss. Not the excuse you choose when the audience grows impatient with your villainy. She released herself from the role he had written for her, and it did not require theater. It required only a sentence whose door would not open again. And then she drew out the last card. the one she had kept not as a weapon, but as a boundary, and boundaries can look like blades to those who love to trespass. Paper has the softest voice in a loud room, and this paper asked the room to quiet even more. She had done the work long before this night, in offices where grief sits in chairs across from pens and learns to sign its name. She had asked the law to meet her dignity, and the law had answered, slow but steady. Birth certificates do not change the past. They tell the future who it belongs to. Names do not fix what has been broken. They choose what gets carried forward and what gets left to rest. The papers were clean. The ink was patient. The signatures had been placed without shaking. The seal had found its mark. 3 lines, each one bearing the same last name, and that name was the one she had borne before anyone tried to convince her she was less than whole. She had given her children her maiden name. She had honored her own lineage, and in that honor she had cut the rope that tied them to a story they did not choose. Lineage is not blood alone. Lineage is the standard you set and the love that keeps pace with it. She would raise them inside a name that asked nothing of them but kindness and courage, and the simple decencies that do not trend but endure. The twist moved through the hall like a quiet wind at first, and then as a clarity that straightened backs. Some had expected her to leave a door ajar for him and call that mercy. Now they saw a different mercy, one that protects children from the performance of a father who had not learned fatherhood, one that protects the mother from the orbit of a man who confuses access with repentance. It was not a punishment. It was a promise. These children will not inherit your cruelty as an expectation. They will not learn your pride as a language. They will not be asked to explain you to themselves before they learn how to tie their shoes. They will be free to choose who you are to them when they are old enough to measure your actions without the static of your spectacle. Until then, their last name will be a shelter, and that shelter will carry the history of a woman who bled and did not break. The crowd did not cheer at first because cheering would have been too loud for what the moment deserved. They nodded, dozens, then hundreds, and in those nods lived the sound of adults agreeing to grow up. A few claps rose and then quieted themselves, as if told by their own hands to wait. This was not a victory lap. This was a boundary set in light. Derrick heard the paper speak and his face learned a new color, the pale you get when you understand that consequences have no interest in your charisma. He reached for explanations that could not breathe in this air. He reached for bargains that had expired. He reached as men reach in dreams when they are falling, and woke to find that gravity does not negotiate. Across the room, Derrick's mother pressed trembling fingers to her mouth and let a sound escape that didn't pick a side so much as grieve what pride does to families. Marcus stood near the projector with his phone lowered now, the work of evidence complete, his posture the posture of someone who knows that justice is not a finish line, but a way of walking. A few guests stepped forward with the shy courage of bystanders who want to do more than film. One woman took off her shawl and draped it over the back of a stroller because the air had cooled and babies are not responsible for the weather grown people make. The moral center of the room, nameless, ordinary, stubborn, slid to where it belonged and stayed there. It did not insist on a punishment. It insisted on a truth. The real reckoning is not whether a man can articulate sorrow in public. It is whether he will live a quiet repair in private for a very long time without asking for applause. The crowd did not sentence him. The crowd took its hands off him and let the absence of an audience teach him how silence feels. Rachel lifted the papers only long enough for the seal to catch the light, then tucked them back where they belonged. This was not theater. It was record. She did not list the hours of labor he had not witnessed, the nights of fever she had cooled with a cloth and a prayer, the mornings when shoes were laced and lunches packed and rent counted in careful stacks, the afternoons when she almost called a number she had deleted because loneliness can sometimes sound like wisdom if it cries with the right voice. She did not recount the hands that had helped when help felt like a rumor, Marcus's envelopes, a neighbor's casserole, a stranger's smile at the checkout line that added $5 behind the quiet. She did not make a case for herself. She let the living evidence in 3 small chests lift and fall and tell the court everything it needed. Derrick found the floor again with his knees and tried to build a prayer out of fragments. He whispered words that had waited too long to be born. He reached not for the strollers this time, but for the space in front of them, and left his palms open there, as if ready to hold nothing at all if that is what the moment required. For the first time that night, his body arranged itself into something like humility, not the borrowed kind that poses, but the exhausted kind that asks for nothing and means it. The room did not soften, and it did not harden. It held him as a fact, the way a ledger holds a number that arrived with no embellishment. A wave moved through the guests then, not a sound but a decision, and the clapping returned, slower, deeper, not to drown him out, but to accompany her forward. It was an escort, not a celebration, the kind of sound a community makes when it chooses to walk behind the right person out of a room that needs airing. Some people said her name again. Not like a chant, but like a blessing. Someone near the doors stepped aside before she began to move, as if guided by a courtesy older than manners. The staff, who had arranged ribbons and poured drinks earlier, stood very still with their hands folded. And in their faces sat the knowledge that a job can turn into a witness without anyone asking it to. Rachel shifted her weight, and the strollers rolled the smallest distance. Wheels whispered across tile, the softest victory song. She did not aim for the exit yet. She let the hall finish its learning. She let the night find its last shape. She looked once more at Derrick, not to measure him, but to release herself from the duty of measuring him. She looked at his mother and offered a small nod, heavy with 1,000 sentences neither woman needed to say out loud. She looked at Marcus, and that look was enough to thank a year of shadows for choosing the light at the correct hour. Then she gave the room what it had come for without knowing. The line that would carry the weight of the night out into the city, where stories travel faster than people do. It would not be clever. It would not be cruel. It would be exact. And exact words, when spoken in a room that has been cleaned by truth, do not need to shout to be permanent. She set her shoulders and let the sentence fall. A single stone placed where it could hold the bridge for those who would cross after her, and her last words silenced even the loudest whispers. A boundary has been set, and the reckoning is here. Miss this and you miss the line everyone will quote. Tap subscribe so you hear the last word. If not, explain in the comments why you turned away from it. The room had learned how to be quiet again, not the stiff silence that follows shock, but the full-bodied hush that comes when a crowd understands it has witnessed a turning. The air was clear, the lights steady, the petals that had fallen from centerpieces resting where they landed like small witnesses content to stay. Rachel stood at the center the way a lighthouse stands, unmoved, bright enough for other people to find their bearings. She looked down at the 3 faces that had changed the night, and without hurry, without performance, without a single word wasted, she slid her hands under the warm weight of the nearest child and lifted gently, then the next, then the last, a practiced grace that belongs only to a mother who has had to be strong every day without a camera in sight. Her arms formed a cradle that could hold the whole idea of tomorrow. She raised them high enough for the back row to see and for doubt to have no place to hide. And when she found her voice, it didn't arrive as a shout or a flourish. It arrived as simple truth that didn't need decoration. You called me barren. God gave me triple. You called me worthless. My children are priceless. You mocked me at a baby shower, but today I am the one showered with blessings. The words did not rush. They landed one by one and stood where they fell, building a small, clean house in the middle of a hall that had been a storm for hours, and the house had enough room for dignity to sit down and stay. The applause began like rain at first, soft, scattered, uncertain where to gather, and then it found its own courage and came forward. A long, steady sound that lifted the ceiling an inch and made the chandeliers seem warmer than glass should be. It moved through the guests from face to face, not as noise that drowns pain, but as music that recognizes it and answers anyway. Hands that had filmed too much put their phones away and used their palms for what they were made for: agreement, gratitude, witness. People stood because the moment was taller than chairs. Some cried because relief carries water with it. Some smiled because hope is a muscle, and this was how it exercises. Derrick did not try to borrow the moment. The applause did not belong to him, and he finally knew it. Pride had no footing left, and the floor beneath him was not a stage anymore. It was simply ground. He looked once at the screen that had shown his worst, once at the table that held the proof he could not outrun, once at the 3 small lives he had not earned the right to define. Then he turned, not with flourish, not with a speech, only with the slow walk of a man who understands that leaving is the only honest act left to perform. His shoes did not echo this time. The room did not amplify him. He passed the torn belly where it lay. He passed the ribbon tails that trailed from a centerpiece like the end of an old story. He passed the staff who held their dignity like a uniform, and he reached the doors. They opened because doors do what they're built to do. He crossed the threshold into a night that had not been written for him, and the doors let themselves close without ceremony. Applause did not chase him. It stayed with the woman who had stood when standing felt like lifting a house. It stayed with the babies who breathed the small, bright breaths of beginnings. It stayed with the mother who understood that blessing is not always loud, but it is always solid. Rachel lowered each child carefully, the way you set down a promise you intend to keep, and she touched each cheek with the same gentleness she had offered on nights when there was no audience to confirm her goodness. She thanked no one with words, and everyone with steadiness. The hall understood. Somewhere between the velvet ropes and the valet line, news began to move at the speed of fingertips. Clips jumped from one phone to another in bright rectangles, captions sprawling like vines. The moment of the strollers under the chandeliers, the DNA envelope ripped open, the hospital tags winking under the light, the mother's confession delivered like a fragile bandage that still did its job, the fake belly thudding on the floor, the recycled sonogram skidding across a polished table to meet the truth, Marcus's photos of laughter that wasn't kind, and the sentence that ended rehearsed cruelty. You called me barren. God gave me triple. Within minutes, the night left the building without needing a coat. The story slipped into group chats and comment threads and timelines. It learned new titles in the hands of strangers and still kept its shape. By the time staff began to roll the cake away, the first million had already watched, thumb-stopping, breath-catching, replaying the 2 seconds where 3 faces looked up into a future that felt cleaner than the room they were in. By the time the last cluster of guests drifted toward the exit, youth groups had already shared it in messages that said, "Look at this strength." Prayer circles had spoken a sentence of blessing over a woman they didn't know. Advocacy accounts had typed the word dignity and meant it. Mothers who had lost and mothers who had waited and mothers who had bled wrote to one another in the comments, "I saw myself. I needed this. I can keep going." A few men wrote what they had needed to say into the open air. "I was him once. I'm learning. I'm sorry." Some voices were cruel because cruelty hates being unemployed, but their noise did not stain the center. It scratched at the windows and found the glass too thick. In the city outside, a church basement switched from setup to celebration, and the fellowship hall TV played a silent loop of Rachel lifting her children while volunteers spooned stew into bowls, and someone said, "This is how God answers small prayers, with bigger hands than we expect." In a hospital break room, a night shift nurse watched on low volume, wiped her eyes with the back of a glove, and went back to the monitors a little taller. In a studio apartment, 3 bus lines from anything shiny. A young woman with her own envelope of bills stacked by due date watched twice, then stood and opened the window because the room felt crowded with hope and fresh air seemed like the next right thing. Inside the hall, people who had stood for the clap now stood in small circles to reflect. They spoke the way you speak when you want a lesson to stick. They promised changes that fit in real calendars, not just captions. Someone who had rolled their eyes at the first rumor of Rachel's name earlier in the evening said to the person beside them, "I missed it," and the other person answered, "Tonight helps you find it." A cousin who had learned to keep score put the notebook away. A colleague who had come for networking left with a note to self. Be the friend who protects. Be the mother who tells the truth when it counts. Be the guest who stops filming and starts helping when the minute requires hands. Marcus did not stay in the spotlight he had never wanted. He cued the projector down, slipped the cable from the port, and tucked his phone away like a tool that had done its work. He asked the staff if they needed tables moved, and when they said they had it, he nodded once and took 3 steps back into the habit of quiet. He did not try to be seen, because being useful had already taken care of being right. Derrick's mother found a chair, sat, and let the flood that follows confession do its work without apology. A stranger handed her a napkin and then another when the first one failed, and the small mercy stitched 2 lives together long enough for the grief to pass. Rachel asked for nothing more than a clear path and received it. The crowd melted toward the sides like water discovering where it should go. She placed one hand on the stroller bar and one on the second and nudged the third with her hip, a choreography learned the hard way in smaller doorways. The wheels hummed. The babies blinked at the chandeliers as if they were stars, or maybe as if stars had decided to practice being chandeliers for a night. She reached the threshold and paused because even strong stories honor doorways. Then she crossed, carrying 3 futures with her like lanterns that cannot be blown out by a room that finally remembered how to inhale. Outside, air that had not learned scandal yet greeted them. Sirens lived elsewhere. Crickets did their simple work. The building behind her kept its lights and lost its power. Rachel buckled each child with the tenderness that comes from not having enough hands and always finding a way anyway. She checked straps twice because that is what love looks like when the audience has gone home. She stood for a breath that belonged only to her and then began to move. Not toward headlines, not away from them either, just toward the next faithful thing. The curb, the car seat, the route home she could drive with her eyes closed. The sink she would visit with a towel and 3 tiny faces. The lamp she would switch on low so the world could be quiet enough for sleep. Online, the story kept traveling in the way good stories do. Never perfectly, always persistently. Clips reached people who thought they were done being surprised by goodness. Headlines learned her name. Comment sections argued and then softened. A teacher printed a still frame for a bulletin board titled "Examples of Courage." A social worker added a link to a training slide. A pastor borrowed a sentence for Sunday and gave it back with interest on Monday when he organized a pantry drive in her honor without announcing why. A donor button appeared under one of the re-uploads and strangers filled it with groceries, diapers, a new stroller wheel, because one had squeaked its way through the night like an exhausted violin. The number on the view counter moved the way long lines move at dawn outside clinics and courthouses and concerts. Slow, then steady, then all at once, until millions was not hyperbole, but the new label on a new shelf where the story now lived. Rachel did not chase any of it. She did not refresh. She did not read comments to figure out who she was. She knew. Faith had not made the road shorter. It had made her feet stronger. Strength had not made her hard. It had taught her where to place softness, so it survived. Resilience had not given her an audience. It had given her a mirror she could look into in bad light and still recognize herself. If people now called her a symbol, she would allow it to pass like weather and keep doing the work that makes symbols unnecessary. Packing bags with snacks, calling doctors back, answering emails from schools, building a home where please and thank you and I'm sorry are not epic lines, but daily bread. Back in rooms with dimmed lights and glowing screens, the closing seconds of 100 edits reached the same finish point. The mother with 3 miracles in her arms. The applause that sounded like repair beginning. The man leaving without a title. And the line that had already learned how to live outside its quotation marks. The last cards on those videos asked the old human question in a new tone because the night had changed the timbre of the world just a little. Would you forgive Derrick? Or should humiliation be his only justice? Subscribe now. The next story might hold the answer your own heart has been running from. And somewhere between skepticism and hope, between weariness and willingness, 1,000 thumbs hovered and then pressed, not because a channel needed a number, but because a heart needed another chapter. The banquet hall would be swept and set for the next event by morning. That is the way buildings practice resilience. The city would forget the address and remember the lesson. That is the way places grow up. Somewhere inside a quiet apartment, 3 small lungs held the night and let it go in sleep. Somewhere at a kitchen table, a woman wrote a short list of things to do tomorrow and underlined none of them because none of them needed drama to be holy. Somewhere on a sidewalk, a man who had been wrong held the absence of applause like a book he should have read sooner and looked up at a sky that does not clap and does not boo and never lies. And somewhere in the space between consequence and mercy, the world waited to see not what he would say next, but who he would become when no one was watching. Millions are watching this blessing in real time. Don't catch up tomorrow. Stand with it today. Press subscribe now. If you still won't, tell the comments why you chose silence over the story.